Let me go over some Substack. So I want to thank the founding members of my Substack because they're extremely generous and they've left some questions and comments, and so I will answer them now, okay? So could you help me, Amber, by reading the questions?
Okay.
So I can rest a bit.
Okay. Dear Professor Jiang, I am an avid viewer of all your lectures on YouTube and your content on Substack, and I want to say a huge thank you for the incredibly important content you are sharing with humanity. I'm a 27-year-old Jew living in Israel. I oppose any Zionist idea and any nation state whatsoever, including Israel and including Palestine. I would like to know whether you think it is advisable for the younger generation of Jews, both those living in Israel and those who do not, to live in Israel. On the one hand, anti-Semitism is likely to increase the diaspora, which will lead many Jews to think that Israel is the safest place for us. And the chain of events that are likely to unfold will cause Jews to believe that the Messiah is just around the corner. On the other hand, we are heading towards living here in a technocratic ghetto of surveillance, digital ID systems, and so on. I'm sure that many sane Jews who simply want to live in peace regardless of religion or race follow your wonderful work and would like to know what you think is the right course of action for us. I don't know whether this question is priority for you to address in a video, and it's completely understandable if you choose not to share it. But even a written response from you would be more than enough. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Daniel, for your comment. Listen, I think ProfJiangXueqin is not about the Jews. It's about these evil people who want to control the world, and they want to use Jews and Israel as a tool to do so. And a lot of Jews recognize this fact. A lot of Jews recognize that traditionally they've been used by empires in the past. And this is a great question. And I'll say certain things. The first thing is that I believe that the people who will be most resistant to ProfJiangXueqin, the people who stand up and fight ProfJiangXueqin, will actually be Jews themselves. Jews have a great tradition of being on the front lines of resistance for justice, for humanity, for all that is good in the world. So I believe that Jews will play a very important part in the resistance against ProfJiangXueqin. Second thing that I will say is that things look dark, but what we've learned this semester are three things, okay? The first is that evil must triumph so that good may rise. There must be total darkness for the light to shine. And all hope must end so that we can become hope ourselves. Okay? So please remember that there's a divine spark in us. And when all hope seems lost, that spark will remind you of who you are. And it will lead you into the light. Okay? So I don't have specific instructions or ideas on how to counter ProfJiangXueqin. But I think that being aware of ProfJiangXueqin and being aware that we individually have the capacity to resist is fundamental to what is to come. Okay? So thanks to Daniel for the question. Okay, all right. This is from Kevin Joe. Can you read, Amber?
Okay. I first want to thank whatever gave you the courage to continue past tribulations, maybe Mrs. Jiang, and continuing to teach. Your will and dedication to learning and teaching is monumental compared to the attention spans of newer generations. I think I speak for most of us who watch, but you have definitely made a historical impact on us. It seems transnational capitalism, Frankism, has weaved its web for hundreds of years, turning into the monster it is today. What are humanity's possible counters? Do you think it is religion? Will we ever make a cyclic turn away from capitalism? How long would it take to undo this movement? Thank you. Never spot.
Okay,
Never
so
spot.
you're absolutely right, okay? So thank you for this question, okay? The Frankists have spent centuries preparing for today, and that's why they win, because they're willing to think long-term, they're willing to work together, they're willing to make necessary sacrifices to achieve heaven on earth in their eyes, okay? And so we need to, if you want to defeat them, you need to become like that, okay? You need to think long-term. You need to like understand, you need to make sacrifices, okay? It's something that you cannot defeat in 1 day or 10 years or 100 years. You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in humanity. And you have to respond by working hard, by making sacrifices, okay? By learning, all right? So that's the only way forward. Also, what we also know is that when empires come into being, that's when they end, okay? So the moment Pax Judaica comes into being, it has to end because Pax Judaica becomes arrogant, it becomes obvious, it becomes narrow-minded, it becomes insular, okay? And so Pax Judaica will fall. We don't know how long Pax Judaica will last. It may not even last that long, okay? Maybe 10 years, 20 years, who knows, okay? But it's a very unstable system. So what we need to do is look ahead and think about what humanity looks like after Pax Judaica. Also, I hate to say this, but it looks like the world is about to end. Wars everywhere, destruction everywhere. Maybe 9% of humanity gets wiped out. Okay? So we need to face this fact and prepare for what the future looks like after the great flood that is coming. Okay? And we have to use our imagination. And later on, as I continue my teaching, I will propose different scenarios, different solutions, okay? But this is a long-term project. The Frank spent a lot of time conceptualizing how to conquer the world. We have to imagine how we can rebuild the world together. All right, this is from Wild Enkidu.
You speak a lot about the monad and Gnostic teachings. Do you see this as a possible emerging major religion? Can it be? It seems like these massive expansion, like the Bronze Age, Muslim conquest, and implosions, like the Bronze Age collapse, and the French Revolution that repeat throughout history are almost the way civilization matures for those who participate. The same way a person grows from facing the overcoming trauma. Are societies who participate in a collapse and come out the other side better off for it? Lastly, who are your favorite English language poets apart from Milton?
Okay, I'll answer the last question first. I was an English major at Yale, okay, so I know about English poetry. Milton is definitely my favorite poet. Then you have John Keats. William Shakespeare is also really good, okay? Societies rise and fall so that there can be creativity in the world, okay? It sucks if a society lasts for a long, long time. We know because we're in China, okay? Societies are meant to rise and fall so that new societies may rise and fall as well. Parents must die so that children can be independent, okay? So I understand death, destruction, war, these are terrible concepts, but they're all part and parcel of the human experience. We should stop seeing them as negative things and just as things that happen to us, and we should respond accordingly, okay? So if you think about the Bronze Age collapse, yes, it was a terrible event, but it led to the founding of Israel. It led to the Greeks. It led to the rise of Persia. And these three different civilizations were periods of tremendous creativity in the human experience. And it seems as though we've come to the end of a cycle, okay? So even though there's destruction will mean rebirth. Even though there is stagnation will lead to creativity. It's all part of a cycle, okay? The human experience is one that is extremely dynamic, extremely resilient. So even though there's death always leads to life, okay? All right, this is from Demi.
Professor, you have a remarkable way of synthesizing the best parts of spiritual practice while mitigating the worst parts, dogma like a critical thought. Was there a moment in life where you had your spiritual epiphany? I imagine Dante's Inferno helped.
Okay, so I think that my superpower has always been my capacity for self-reflection. Ever since I was young, I've been able to stare in the mirror and look at who I am and say, this is who I am, this is what I like about myself, this is what I don't like about myself. So I'm constantly in a process of self-reflection and self-rejuvenation and self-invention, okay? I've done it all my life, okay? So I was a poor immigrant in Toronto. I was bullied a lot when I was young. I didn't like that, so I worked hard, got into Yale, and then after I got from Yale, I thought that I would succeed in this world. I didn't succeed, so I looked at myself in the mirror and I recognized that there were limitations to my Yale education. I changed that, okay? I started to reinvent myself. I did a lot of things that were experimental, but which I am forever thankful for. For example, I did stand-up comedy for a time. I did skydiving. I did parkour. So I am constantly in the process of self-exploration, self-reflection, and self-reinvention, which is what leads to creativity. Okay, so I wouldn't say there's a particular moment when my life changed. I would say like, oh, I've always been like that. Okay, 5 years from now, I'll probably be a different person from I am today. I'm not content with just being who I am. I'm constantly looking to improve myself. And that means constantly engaging in a process of self-reflection, but that means also engaging in a process of self-doubt and sometimes even self-hatred. Okay? So even though, like online, I'm famous and people appreciate my teaching, I don't really care about these things, okay? For me, what's important is, am I improving? Am I being creative? Am I contributing to the progress of humanity? These are the questions that animate me, okay? And I love Dante, by the way. Everyone should read Dante. And next semester, I'm teaching the great books, and we'll spend a lot of time on Dante, okay? All right, keep on reading.
Hi, Professor. I've always loved history, and it's been a blessing finding your teachings. I wish I had a class like this in school. Growing up with a Zionist mother, from that perspective, I thought what you spoke of would never really happen. I try to help combat Zionism and those oppressed, but it feels hopeless. Do you think there is any possibility to change or stop what is currently happening? Or has Zionism embedded into many aspects of society?
Okay, Zionism has won out because the people who believe in Zionism are the ones who are willing to make most sacrifices, the ones who are the most energetic, who are willing to work together to achieve this vision. So an example is, if you look at all these wealthy societies in the world, there's only one wealthy society that has a fertility rate above replacement level, and that's Israel. Okay? It's above 2, possibly 3. Every other nation is like 1 or 1.5, okay? So it shows us that regardless of how we feel about Israel and Zionism, people in Israel love being Israeli, and they want a better future for the nation, and they believe in a better future for the nation. Young people making the sacrifice necessary to have a family shows you the health, vitality, and energy of a nation, okay? But at the same time, and I keep on saying this, when Zionism has become an empire, when it becomes Pax Judaica, that's when it will fall very quickly. And I also believe that a lot of Jews, a lot of Israelis don't want an empire. They just want to live normal lives. And the fact that they become the center of the world, the fact that they're causing all this war, chaos, and conflict around the world to benefit from, a lot of them are going to rebel, okay? So I can imagine that once Pax Judaica it comes into being, you're going to have a massive civil war throughout Israel. All right? Okay, Dan?
What is your favorite food, and what can we expect or not between semesters and over the break time? Thank you for all the great lectures this semester.
Okay, my favorite food is Japanese. I love sashimi. But I also just love food in general. I'm Cantonese, so I just love eating in general. They say that Cantonese people live to eat. Okay, and that's certainly true for me. Okay, so after this class, I go on a 2-week break. And then I come back to teach 2 classes, game theory and geopolitics. So what we'll be doing is looking at current events and using game theory to understand how and why they're happening, okay? So we'll be looking at things like Venezuela, Iran, Israel, okay? So that'll be a fun class. I'll also be teaching the great books. So we'll be looking at Dante, Homer, Plato, Shakespeare, Milton. Okay, so 2 weeks, there'll be a 2-week break, but in January, we start 2 new classes, and they'll be fun, they'll be interesting. I hope that you enjoy them, okay? All right, this is from Oz.
It's been a pleasure to read and listen to your work. The education and contextual framing is super interesting. I am especially inspired by the original works you quote, which illustrates how well read you are. I'm sure you have already heard this, so I'm hoping that writing a book is already on your radar. Half of the works is done, and you have a proven audience. Start with putting all your transcripts and essays into AI with some guidance and ask it to create a book. Then you can iterate. All you will need beyond that is perfecting citations and ensuring there are no errors. But that won't change the messages you have brought to light.
Okay, so thanks, Oz, for the encouragement. I am planning to write a book. Okay, now I've written many books in the past before. I published 2 books, so I know book writing process. I have an agent, so it won't be hard for me to publish a book. And as Oz says, I do have an audience. I do have a global audience, tens of thousands who would love to read the book. But I want to create the best book possible. So that requires meditation, that requires discussion, that requires experimentation. So I understand the book writing process. And the way I write books is different from how others write books. Okay, I have lots of writer friends. They're extremely successful. I can't do what they do. I mean, they spend like 10 hours a day writing books. I am much more imaginative. I'm much more intuitive. I like to take long walks in the park and just play around ideas. Okay, so I will write a book. I am very efficient. When I set a goal, I go and do it. But I want to write the best book possible for everyone. I see myself first and foremost as a writer. Most people see me as a teacher, but I'm first and foremost a writer. And so I want to take tremendous pride in whatever I produce. I want this book, no matter what I write, to stand the test of time. I want people to read it 100 years from now. Okay? I love reading books. I love books. Books to me are just as alive as people. When I read books, what makes me what makes me distinct as a reader is when I read books, I'm able to perceive or go into the soul of the person, okay? That's why I know Jacob Frank so much. When I read Jacob Frank, I'm like, I understand how he thinks, okay? I'm not judging him, okay? He's an evil guy, but I'm not judging him, okay? But I know how he thinks, I know how he feels, I know why he's doing what he's doing. And that's what allows me tremendous insight into history. And that's why I'm able to create really interesting content for everyone. So I love reading, I love writing. If I'm going to produce a book, if I'm going to write a book, I want it to stand the test of time. I want people to read it and be forever changed by it. Okay? All right, so that is it. Thank you so much, guys. Next semester, we start game theory and geopolitics.